Hello, and welcome to the first episode of 5-Minute JavaScript. So I've been really thinking a lot about doing a free JavaScript course because I think that there's a lot of people that want to learn to code, but they really have a lot of apprehension about learning certain things because it's so new and so different. And, JavaScript, I think, is one of the easiest languages to learn kind of out of the box for a bunch of reasons. For those out there who are already familiar with JavaScript, please watch the whole video and make comments about, certain things. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there's a question that should be answered up front. And that way when people watch the video, they'll be able to look back and say, oh, okay, he answered that. I would also love feedback in a sense of the format. Let me know if there's something you think I should improve. Now, obviously, JavaScript's not the only language on the planet, but the nice thing about JavaScript is its accessibility. It's very easy to get started and to play with. And it's also very usable in a sense of you can do things with it that in the real world right away, whether it's kind of building a web page or something like that, something that, people can tangibly grasp that doesn't require this massive amount of understanding or even kind of foundational architecture. There's quite a few people out there that are probably thinking, maybe you need to learn HTML first or CSS first, which, that's what people learn sometimes is you learn the kind of the view structure before you learn the code that drives it. But I wanted to do this first initial video to get new people familiar with how simple actually JavaScript is. So all you need to do to get started with JavaScript, in this case, is just have Firefox, for example. I'm kind of a purist, so I like to stick with Firefox, but let me show you what you can do. Up on the hamburger menu here, as some people call it, there's a developer option that allows you to click Scratchpad. So let's bring the Scratchpad up here. Now what the Scratchpad allows you to do, it allows you to write code and test it live in the browser. So it's very simple. So I haven't, downloaded any crazy editors or super software or anything like that. All I've done is basically loaded up this Scratchpad. So generally how the Scratchpad works is you can execute code on the web page that you're looking at, which again sounds pretty like hackery, right? Well, that's basically what it is. At the same time, you can do things like inspect or display, which is another way of showing off what your results are. So let's talk about how that works. First things first is we're just going to say alert, hello, right? And we're going to click run. The alert function is actually something that's available to the browser. It's not a key element in JavaScript at all, but this is just to demonstrate that, hey, I can emit something here, okay? Click OK, go back to our Scratchpad. And the other thing we can do is, for example, I'll just put hello, and we can go inspect, and you'll see that for that line, it's displaying what the end of that line's value is, which is also really nice and actually pretty simple. And we'll generally be using this because it's much easier to show what's going on. So in the spirit of 5-minute JavaScript, I'm trying to keep these videos really short because I think that the natural learning progression for most people is you don't want to overload. You don't want to be, oh man, you just gave me 10 hours worth of information. I suggest that anything that you learn here, you take and you go practice with it and play around. Get a useful understanding before going back and watching more videos. So the first thing I try to tell people is that JavaScript is kind of like algebra. You can specify values like x equals 10, y equals 20, right? Then you can do things like z equals x plus y. And then you could inspect z and you'll see that z equals 30, right? Really simple. And this is all very straightforward, legitimate JavaScript. Okay, now obviously I can add things together. Let's say I want to have like a special function. Like if you remember algebra and you had things like 2x, plus whatever, kind of formulas, kind of quadratic style formulas, then, let's create something that does that for us. So we're going to go function q, for example, and then we'll do a, b, and c. All right. And let's say that our function is going to take a times b plus c. All right. Now we can sit here and say that in this case we're using x, y, and z. Let's come up with one called, we'll just say result, right? So we'll say result equals q, x, y, z. All right. And then we can actually, at the end of this, we can just click inspect, and voila, we have the value is 500. And as you can see, similar to algebra, right? Just like we've defined a function, or actually more like calculus, you'll see that calculus has like f of x, right? So this is essentially f of x, y, and z, which ultimately is using this math. So take note, this is the foundations of JavaScript. These are the basic things that you can do. You can set variables, you can define functions, which can be reused. For example, you could have result2 equals q, 1, 2, 3. And this is totally valid as well. So you're reusing things. That's the usefulness of a function, is the reuse. And you can also do functions within functions, right? So I could actually, we'll go ahead and kind of collapse this guy here, which is part of the Scratchpad functionality. We'll create a new function called p, and it'll take a number a, for example, and we're going to return a times q 5, 6, 7. And then we'll do result 3 equals p 10, and let's see what we get. So what we're showing here is that we have the ability to include functions within functions. We can define variables, and we can emit their results. We can reuse them. This is kind of, again, this is the foundations of JavaScript. So before this video is over, I want to cover some important concepts. Now you may have noticed that I put these functions at the bottom of the file and not at the top. The reason why I did that is I wanted to demonstrate that these are called named functions. So named functions, because they have a name, because they've been defined with a name, they can be placed anywhere within this file. And the nice thing about that is that we can kind of look at the meat of what we're trying to do at the top, and these things can kind of be out of the way. And that's the point behind putting them at the bottom. It's just to make it a little cleaner, a little easier to read. If you want to figure out what those functions are, you can go look them up. You scroll down and you see, oh, okay, this is what Q and P do. So for ease of understanding and simplicity's sake, I've omitted some conventions here, just to get people familiar with the algebraic nature of JavaScript. One thing that you'll see quite commonly is that there'll be semicolons at the end of lines. This is a convention, and again, different people from different camps are going to argue for or against this. But the reason for the semicolons is because a lot of times readable code is about displaying your intention and having a very strong indication of your intention. By putting a semicolon at the end of the line, you are making sure that people understand that is what I wanted. I wanted that to be the end of the line. So the last important thing to note is that all of these variables that I've declared, x, y, z, result2, and result3, are all declared on the global scope. And now what that means is that they exist everywhere essentially everywhere within your application. Now that can be unwieldy after a while because, what if you want to redeclare x, y, and z within a function or something like that? So it gets a little bit sketchy. So this is actually generally a bad habit to declare things globally like this. Common practice is to declare something as a var. So the right way to think about this is if you think of it like algebra, all you're really doing is saying, for this block of code, I am declaring a variable x. And it's also possible to declare variables without actually setting a value. So you're essentially just kind of saying, within this block of code here, I am declaring that these variables will be used. That way it's essentially containing those variables within this block. Now again, as I showed you, you can totally get away with not doing this, but as you progress with JavaScript, what you're going to find out is that var, and also now very commonly using the keyword let, are used all the time. And it's actually very rare to have a variable that's declared globally. So get used to using var or let. And in fact, at this point in time, for the most part, you should probably use let for almost everything. We'll get into what the differences between var and let are later. They're not really important at this point. So after this video, I highly suggest taking some time out and toying around with JavaScript. Do silly things like I'm doing, where you're adding numbers together, inspecting the result, and see what you can come up with. Just spend a few minutes just getting used to it. I'm just doing numbers here. Whatever you want to do, just kind of see what JavaScript does. You can't hurt it, right? You're just toying around and figuring things out. And hopefully this kind of opens you up to some of the possibilities and kind of dispels any fears about entering into kind of the code world. And then we'll see you in the next video and you can learn some more. Thanks.